Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're tackling a massive question facing Japan, a real national crossroads over its nuclear power. We're going to break down the critical debate that will absolutely define its future.
All right, let's get right into it. The core question sounds pretty simple, right? Should Japan just ban nuclear power immediately? But the answer is anything but simple. We're going to explore both sides of this to figure out if an immediate ban is the only truly safe option or if it's actually a recipe for a total disaster.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll set the scene and talk about the backstory. Then we'll dig into the two big arguments. One side says it's an unacceptable risk, the other says it's an unavoidable necessity. And finally, we'll look at what this all means for the future.
Okay, first up, let's talk context. To really get a handle on this debate, you have to understand why it's so important right now. The stakes are just incredibly high for Japan, and honestly, it all goes back to one single catastrophic event. You know, the ghost of the Fukushima Daiichi disaster hangs over this entire conversation. It was just this brutal, heartbreaking lesson that even with the best safety measures in the world, the unthinkable can absolutely happen. It showed everyone that sometimes you just can't predict or plan for the sheer power of nature. All right, so let's look at the first side of this. The people who are calling for an immediate ban. For them, the argument is pretty straightforward. The risk that comes with nuclear power is just, it's unacceptable. It's too big a gamble, especially for a country like Japan. And this quote really hits the nail on the head. I mean, think about it. Japan is right on the Pacific Ring of Fire. Earthquakes are a fact of life there. So the argument goes, you can make plants as strong as you want, but you can never make the risk zero. It's not a question of if something big and unpredictable will happen again. It's a question of when. So their whole case really boils down to a few key points. First, this idea of perfect safety is just a fantasy. You can never get the risk down to zero. Second, there's the massive problem of radioactive waste, which we still have no real solution for. And third, they see a ban as a catalyst, right? It would force Japan to double down on renewable energy and, as a bonus, make them less reliant on imported uranium.
And this right here, this is the scale of that waste problem. Those Japanese characters on the screen, they mean tens of thousands of years. Just let that sink in. We're talking about managing incredibly dangerous material for a period of time that's longer than recorded human history. It's a timeline that's almost impossible for our brains to even process. And that leads to this really heavy ethical question, doesn't it? Is it right? Is it fair to kick this can down the road and basically force generations of people who aren't even born yet to deal with our toxic leftovers? A problem we created but can't solve.
Okay, so that's one side. Now let's flip it around and look at the counterpoint. For this group, nuclear power isn't some luxury or a simple choice. It's an absolute, unavoidable necessity if Japan wants to remain stable. And a huge part of their argument is right here in this chart. Take a look. Nuclear power accounts for about 20% of Japan's electricity. That's a massive chunk. You just can't turn off a fifth of a country's power grid overnight and expect things to go smoothly. The disruption would be enormous.
So their argument is all about the immediate, practical consequences of a ban. They're saying, look, if you do this, you're looking at a real threat of blackouts. You're going to see electricity bills skyrocket for everyone. And, ironically, you'll actually hurt your climate goals because you'll have to burn more fossil fuels. Plus, you'd be throwing away the chance to develop safer, better nuclear tech down the road. And this slide really lays out the economic trade-off they're talking about. On one hand, an immediate ban looks like a recipe for chaos, power shortages, price hikes, economic instability. On the other hand, a gradual reduction, well, that gives you stability. It lets you control costs and plan for the future in a predictable way. For them, the choice is obvious. Now, this is where it gets really interesting because both sides actually bring up climate change to support their case. Let's start with the pro-ban view. They argue that nuclear isn't the zero-emission hero it's made out to be. When you factor in the entire life cycle, mining the uranium, constructing the massive plants, and then dealing with the waste for thousands of years, it actually has a pretty significant carbon footprint. But the other side comes back with a really pragmatic and kind of stark counterpoint. They say, okay, fine, but if you ban nuclear power tomorrow, where does that 20% of your electricity come from? There's no magic switch. In the real world, in the short term, it means firing up more coal and natural gas plants, and that leads to a direct, immediate, and massive increase in CO2 emissions. It's a tough pill to swallow.
So you see, this whole thing is way bigger than just talking about power plants or the economy. What we're really looking at here is a clash between two completely different visions for what Japan's future should be. Two totally different philosophies. The first vision, let's call it the precautionary path. This path is all about prioritizing safety above everything else. It says the risk of another Fukushima, no matter how small, is just too catastrophic to live with. So you have to eliminate that risk now, period. The belief is that by taking that bold, decisive step, you'll actually force society to innovate and figure out the renewable energy solutions needed to fill the void. And the second vision, we can call that the stability path. This one is all about the here and now. It prioritizes keeping the lights on, keeping the economy humming, and maintaining stability for people today. This path puts its faith in technology and human ingenuity, believing that we'll eventually invent our way out of the problem with things like safer next-generation reactors that can also help manage the waste. And this table just lays it all out so clearly. You can see how these two visions clash on every single important issue. On safety, it's unacceptable risk versus manageable risk. On economics, it's hidden costs are too high versus it's essential for low prices. They're just fundamentally different ways of looking at the same set of problems. So when you boil it all down, that's the monumental choice, isn't it? Do you rip off the Band-Aid, eliminate that worst-case risk right now, and just deal with the economic fallout? Or do you prioritize stability today, keep things running smoothly, and place your bets on future technology to solve the risks down the road? There's no easy answer, and whichever path Japan chooses will shape its destiny for generations.